This is Embodied from PRX and WUNC. I'm Anita Rao. American men are in a friendship recession. Compared to a few decades ago, 5 times as many men have no close friends. So what's going on?
We don't put the importance on friendships in this country for adults, but specifically for men. It's this track where, you get in a long-term relationship, you get married, and your emotional support ends there.
Today on the show, a conversation with podcaster and writer Mark Pagán about what makes close friendships among men so fraught and what we can do about it.
My work as a person towards myself, but as well as what I would like to do for the rest of my life, is to take steps to remove shame and self-consciousness for other men so that they can either start having those conversations or start answering those physical needs organically.
Stories about secret handshakes and emotional vulnerability. Just ahead on Embodied. Hey there, it's Anita. If you're looking for a new podcast to listen to that's focused on relationships, dating, romance, sex, and more, then you need to check out the new season of Love Letters from the Boston Globe. In this season, the big question they're exploring is, can people change? And in doing so, can they be better at love and relationships? Each episode brings real stories of transformation, resilience, and growth. You're going to hear from people navigating big life changes, mending broken bonds, and learning what it truly takes to evolve. Listen or watch the new season of Love Letters from the Boston Globe wherever you get your podcasts. There's a feeling we talk a lot about on this show when you finally get clarity about something you've been experiencing in your body your whole life, and suddenly everything makes more sense. I have a podcast recommendation for you that dives deep into this exact feeling. It's a new show called Climbing the Walls. It's from the perspective of a science journalist who lived much of her life feeling like she was constantly falling short until she got an ADHD diagnosis at age 36. Daniel Elliott joined a cohort that's grown exponentially in the past few years, adult women with ADHD. She brings her reporting chops to the questions, why women, why now? And how has this underdiagnosis affected women's mental health? Climbing the Walls is produced by Understood.org, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting people with learning differences like ADHD and dyslexia. To listen to Climbing the Walls, search for Climbing the Walls in your podcast app. That's Climbing the Walls.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.
I want to tell you a story about an email that's about so much more than an email. It was an exchange between 2 men about 6 years ago, Mark and Sam. Mark Pagán is a podcaster, filmmaker, and deep thinker. Sam is one of his closest friends. And at this moment in their friendship, Mark and Sam were living in different cities, so they'd send each other these long life updates.
At the bottom of the email, I wrote the words, I miss you. Just plainly, I miss you. No man, no dude, nothing like that. I miss you, period. And I was about to hit send, and I erased those words and sent the email.
Despite the closeness of their friendship, Mark just couldn't write those words.
If I'm one of those people who's been, quote unquote, doing the right work to better himself as a man, how am I still having the same issues?
This is Embodied. I'm Anita Rao. I first heard the story of that email exchange in Mark Pagán's own podcast. And what stuck with me was how radically different his experience of friendships as an adult was from my own. I'm honestly not that much of an effusive verbal communicator. Yet, I probably send a handful of texts or voice notes each week to my long-distance best friends with those exact words. I miss you. Until hearing Mark's episode, I had never thought twice about it. Are the dynamics in male friendships that different? So I wanted to sit down with Mark and start to unravel this story. At the root of it is the question we'll tackle together today. What makes close friendships among men so difficult to make and maintain? And what can we do about it? Mark has been sorting through the quandaries of masculinity and male friendship for years through his Substack newsletter, Other Men, and his podcast, Other Men Need Help. That email story is one he spent a whole episode unpacking.
I miss you, I think, is more dangerous a phrase than I love you for a lot of men.
Why is that?
People in general. And I think we say that I love you is this hurdle for men. You know, there's this whole, I think, a pretty dumb stereotype you see in movies and things like that, where, let's say in a heterosexual relationship, the woman says, I love you. And the guy goes, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, that happens in life. Sure. Like it has happened. But I actually don't think that's such an issue. I miss you, I think, displays a heavier degree of vulnerability. What you're saying is, I need you. What you're saying is, you linger in my mind. Your presence means a lot to me. When you are gone, it affects me. And I think it is really hard for men. And with our conversation today, I'll limit it to Western men, in particular North American men, because I think the standards are different around the world in terms of how people are socialized and conversations about inequities, gender inequities, and what that means for certain male spaces. So I'm talking about North American men, but the ways that we're socialized super early to really push down anything that's considered longing or desire for another boy or for another man. And it happens really early. I've worked with kids of all ages in my life as an educator, and boys at 4 or 5 are sometimes told, well, it's time to stop saying I love you to this friend of yours. Or it's the way that you're making that sound, it's shrieking. It sounds like a girl. You shouldn't display emotion that way. And from that early age, the ways that we are boxed to display and work with our friendships really puts us in quite a straitjacket when it comes to this like simple human acknowledgement, like I miss you.
I want to take you back to Sam for a second, because you did eventually talk with him directly about this email. You told him, hey, I wrote, I miss you, and then I deleted it. Tell me about that conversation and what his response was.
Oh, it's so silly. Because of course he was like, oh, you should have written that. He should have said it. He said, and I would have said the same thing back to you. But it allowed us to unpack these little voices, these almost gremlins that are, I call them masculine pinches. You know, it happens in sort of the belly, and it's almost like there's this little gremlin in there going like, don't say that, don't do that. And you're like, wait, what's going on? This is a friend of mine. He's like, no, but you are going to show up. And it puts all these thoughts in your head. And it's funny because Sam, again, this guy who I really respect, he gave an example about how he'll think, oh, Charlie, yeah, I should really get in touch with him. I've been thinking about him a lot. And then almost this roadrunner gremlin that runs across his head like, ooh, does that mean you want to kiss him? Does that mean you want to hold him? And all of these things. And the conversation was responding like, why am I still shackled by early homophobic socializing? He was very eloquent and basically said, our brains can't think outside of black and white boundaries. If you have affection or a need for somebody, then it is moving into the realm of romantic. And I think that's probably why, and I've suffered this as well, probably why so many men in adulthood put a lot of our emotional labor on our partners. Because if I do that with another man, that denotes in my head, in this gremlin part of my head, I have a longing for this man.
So you're talking about this kind of way we're going to continue to unpack like the links between feelings of intimacy and internalized homophobia. But I want to point to another distinction that I'm curious about in your own experience. You say when you're saying men, you're kind of narrowing it to a Western context. Through your research and interviews and in your own personal experience, do these dynamics play out differently for men who aren't cisgender and who aren't heterosexual?
I think so. And there's only so much that I can say outside of just observation.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to have the same experience in a circle of trans peers than a trans person would. And there's going to be different areas of negotiating. This is not me saying this is the experience of everybody, but just interesting things that I hadn't considered about somebody who's a trans man, and then the ways in which they have started navigating workspaces differently or have adapted to being a little bit more cold because like, oh, I seem to be accepted more if I'm acting a little bit more cold in these spaces. And I think that's really, really interesting. When I was younger, I romanticized different parts of the world because of the ways that I projected the community side of these male spaces. I'd watch movies or I'd see the news or even traveling and say, oh my God, look at these guys. They've got their arms around each other. They're super affectionate. They're even kissing on the cheek. There doesn't seem to be these restrictions. They seem so free with the way they're expressing themselves. Why does the world have it so much better? And I think we all have our own issues. And I can only speak in terms of observation and research, but a lot of those places are extremely segregated gender-wise. And so you can be freer. A man can be freer, potentially feel freer and expressing emotion, things like that, when there's no gender competition.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm curious to take you back in time a little bit to connect some of these dots between your own friendships and these broader forces of masculinity and cultural scripts around what friendship can look like. If you think back to being a kid before the baggage of adulthood or before you inherited some of these scripts, what was it like then for you to make friends with other boys?
I remember around second grade, age of 8 or so, coming home and telling my mom with the same enthusiasm as I got into law school or whatever, life event, that like I made a friend. I made this new friend. And it wasn't the thing of like being a lonely kid and not having friends. It was just I made a new friend. We hung out on the playground. We played some games and it was awesome. And just that pure, unfiltered, unself-conscious joy of that. And then I think of like 4 years later when puberty started, I had a cousin of mine who he lived in Puerto Rico and then moved to Texas. I was in Maryland, so we weren't in the same area ever in terms of living, but we loved each other. Whenever I go to Puerto Rico, we were just together all the time. He was my best friend.
Uh-huh.
He was a cousin, but he was my best friend. So we had a pen pal relationship for years. And it was great. I did this and I got into this and I got this comic book and this is what school, blah, blah, blah. Very pure, very open. And I think around the age of 12, I remember this so clearly. My mom had given me, you have like a label, like a mailing label, like Mark Pagán.
Oh, yeah.
Address.
Yeah, like an address label.
Like an address label. And it had some sort of illustration on it or something. She got it from a catalog. Anyway, I had it. I started using it for mail. I sent my cousin a letter. He replied back and he said, your label or whatever he called it, whatever it was, doesn't matter. The key thing is he used one word that really did not sit well with me. And he said, your label is very cute. And I remember my face going, ew, like that, and seeing him differently. And like the crazy difference from 4 years of sitting with this kid, Max, on the playground and feeling no sense of self-consciousness or anything like that, to my cousin, who I had the same sort of relationship with, the same like unfiltered, affectionate relationship with, to seeing him so differently because of one word that to me equated, it equated queerness, it equated being other, it equated girliness. There's so many labels at the time I could have used on it, but I give that example to say like the lovely energy that can exist between friends at that age, but especially boys, before we're told not to act a certain way.
Mark Pagán hosts the podcast Other Men Need Help and writes the Substack newsletter Other Men. Just ahead, Mark will share some of the small moments and rituals of male friendship that he thinks should get a little more love, like the secret handshake. You're listening to Embodied from North Carolina Public Radio, a broadcast service of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. You can also hear Embodied as a podcast. Follow and subscribe on your platform of choice. We'll be right back. This is Embodied. I'm Anita Rao. We're talking about the complexities of male friendship with Mark Pagán, who's documented his own interrogation of the topic in his newsletter and his podcast for years. When Mark was growing up, most of his models for friendship were based on the interactions he saw between the women in his life. But he did have one role model for male friendship: his dad.
My father, culturally, by nature being a Caribbean man, and perhaps being older, he was so affectionate with the people and the men in his life. I'm sort of warmed over by memories of just looking up and watching the conversations where my father would have his hand for minutes at a time on somebody's shoulder, or the sort of holding another man's cheeks, while you're looking like, it's so good to see you. It's so good to see you.
Mark was 14 when his dad died. But as an adult, these memories sparked a curiosity about what physical affection between male friends can look like, and the seemingly small but hugely important rituals that help keep a friendship going. Rituals, for example, like a secret handshake, which he captures in season 3 of his podcast, Other Men Need Help.
Hands together that becomes like a fist, and then like back pat, kind of in close.
Hand up, palm out, embrace Corey's other hand, grabbed hand by hand, pulled shoulder to shoulder, gave him the brother slap on the back of the back.
We hug, and then I have a thing where I reach down and do a little double tap on the ass.
Okay, so tell me about this friendship ritual in particular and why you wanted to capture it.
We talk a lot about the friendship gap that is happening for men. And I don't disagree with that. I think that there is a lot of work that we have to do individually as well as culturally, and tons of stuff. But what I'm not hearing, and what I want to hear more of, is the celebration of those bonding moments that we're overlooking, and that we overlook in our own friendships. And I'm curious about the ways that those sit with us, those small, ephemeral interactions, how they sit with us when we're away from each other, how they would sit with us if we spent a moment to think about it or talk about the importance of these rituals. And I just think there's so much that happens in friendships, and there's so much that happens in friendships between men that I just find so beautiful. I just find so beautiful. And I think I love the idea of the idiosyncrasy and the intimacy that happens where two people say to each other, whether it's as explicit as this or not, but over time, like, we are going to create a physical way of showing our relationship to each other, as well as showing our identity, showing why we are this unit. And I just wanted to capture that, or at least a small piece of that, and take a moment to step away from the rhetoric of men are in trouble, which again, I'm not disagreeing with, but adding more to the conversation of what are we getting right and what can we lean more into.
I'm curious about that, because in hearing you say that, there's a part of me that says, yes, incredible that like men make this ritual of celebration, but is this in place of a longing for more physical touch? And this is the only sanctioned way to do it, is in this kind of performative slapping each other in the butt. But really, if you could, you would just be hugging each other and holding each other. Like, how do you think about that?
Well, that's the bridge, and that's the void that I'm trying to figure out. And I think the first step, this is never going to be the poster for other men in terms of this mission statement here. But my work as a person towards myself, but as well as what I would like to do for the rest of my life, is to take steps to remove shame. And I think if the first step is normalizing, celebrating, lauding something that already exists as a physical space in your life, perhaps by normalizing that, you can maybe have a conversation with your friend about taking another step or bridging, or you can feel that it's more normalized in general to be affectionate and things like that. That's a heavy load to put on something that's just a podcast episode.
Yeah.
But I would like to offer displays that are subtly just normalizing the physical need that we all have as human beings, and totally normalizing it, pointing out the ways this is how it's already happening, and it's great. Don't you want more? Or like, how else can we celebrate each other or spend time with each other physically in friendships? But the real, the overall goal is to try to just find the right ways that I or this platform can remove those feelings of shame and self-consciousness for other men so that they can either start having those conversations or start bridging those physical or answering those physical needs organically. I'm not sure I have the answer just yet, but these are my early attempts.
Is there a friendship in your own life where you have worked through this barrier of physical intimacy, or where physical intimacy plays a role that you are happy with?
There's a bunch of layers to this story, but I moved into college and started being more conscious of the fact that I was Latino and didn't grow up I grew up in a fairly diverse area, but I just didn't grow up with a lot of Latinos, let alone Caribbean Latinos. And I felt like a real void. And I met who I'm calling Fabian at some point in college, this Colombian dude. And he was one of the first people to, it feels silly to say this, but he's one of the first people to call me friend in Spanish, amigo or parcero, Colombian Spanish. And he was what I love about being Latino, about being Caribbean Latino, is that he was like my father. He was sort of the hands on the cheek kind of affection guy. Just like, Mark, I love you, man. Like, just there, and put his arm around me. Like this guy right here, he's so good. This is my friend. He's so cool. And you're like, yeah. You get just so much energy there. And there's like, you're not self-conscious about it at all. And it just felt so wonderful. And we ended college. We went our own ways. And I lived in South America for a time, and he had moved back to Colombia. And I had gotten in touch with him, and I thought, oh man, can I meet up? Can I stop in Colombia? He said, yeah, come up. And when I was fantasizing about the trip, I remember the flight to Bogota. I wasn't fantasizing so much about I'm going to eat this or do this or see this. I was fantasizing about our reunion at the airport. And I mentioned this in the episode. When I was growing up, my father traveled a lot. We would go pick him up late from these international flights at Dulles Airport in the DC area. And it was sort of like this mood board of other ethnic families, but in particular like ethnic men that were just waiting for their loved ones to come. And then the doors would open, and it was just this cacophony of like, so good to see you, like hugs and blah, blah, blah. And like so much Old Spice cologne and all this stuff. And it was like, and I just remember being a kid going, this is great. Whoa, like, look at these guys. And I was just like, I'm finally in adulthood where I've got some financial freedom to do some traveling and to do what I thought of like ports of entry where men will greet me and envelop me and, all this stuff. And I get there to Bogota and I can't find him. The door's open. He's not there. And it wasn't pre-cell phone. I just didn't have a cell phone. It was like 2006 or 7 or something. And so I didn't have a call. I was just wandering around the air like, where is this guy? Where is this guy? And then I like 10 feet away, I see this guy who looks like Fabian standing by the door, and he's on his phone just playing Snake. And I sort of tiptoe, like I'm like, my eyes are a little like, peeking, like, is that the guy? That's him. And I walk over to him and I go, Fabian. And he looks up from his phone. He goes, oh, hey, Mark, how's it going? And he gives me a hug that I think I describe as like a cold fish hug.
Yes, I know
Just
that hug.
Yeah, just it's like, am I dying? Like, are you being gentle with my body? Like, what happened to you? And it was a devastating. These small moments, I think, are really important to point out because they at least to me, there are paths I could have gone in life with that.
Yeah.
I still had this level of affection for a friend. I still had this expectation of how friendships could be, but I was in my 20s. And then very easily, I could have taken that experience and be like, that was humiliating. I'm so ashamed. I'm never going to ask or expect anything from a man ever again. I could have gone that route. And I had moments like that, but I never officially did, luckily, for whatever reason. And I have had friends that have picked me up at the airport. We've sort of done the, I don't know what to call it, the jig, where you sort of you see each other and then you're sort of, we're not on video, but we're hugging so tight, and then our legs are sort of oompa looping up and down. It's like, so good to see you, that sort of thing. And it's like that. I'm so happy that I have that in my life, and that there is a path that a lot of men go, which is the other path, and going, this is so shameful to me.
Well, it seems like the fork in the road is like, can I admit that I want this, and can I say this out loud, or am I just going to internalize that I have a deep need for connection that isn't going to be met, so I'm just going to not seek it out anymore.
Yeah. And that's it. You're absolutely right. That's the thing.
I mean, I'm curious, when you think about what this connection looks like in your life now, how do you build new close male friendships in adulthood? Like these people that you're able to Oompa Loompa toward, what is the foundation of these friendships?
I've looked at this and I don't have the clearest answer. So I'm gonna talk it out and tell you what has made sense to me. I think the first thing is a degree of self-confidence, which has really helped to say, as you said, this is what I want. This is important to me.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily have to be explicit about it, but I'm going to lean into friendships that have that opportunity. It's also saying to myself, I need to you build the world you want to live in. So I do need to say, I miss you more. I do need to be the one that says, I've been thinking about you, or you crossed my mind. I just wanted to let you know that. I'll tell you the truth, though. I'll tell you the truth. I don't think I've ever asked another man to hold me or hug me. I have barely even asked my spouse to do that. She does it organically, quote unquote, like she senses I'm upset, or, we're in a situation in which she can see that something is bothering me. But that is a barrier. That is a barrier that I will truthfully say I have not crossed. And I don't know if I'd say it's a next step, but it's definitely something that's, in some ways, it's bothered me.
Does it catch in your throat? You're at the point where you're able to identify it as a need. And so is it on its way to coming out your mouth and then you stop yourself? Can you kind of envision where the block is happening?
I'm working on it, and I'm not sure, because it usually happens. This is probably revealing too much here, but whatever. I mean, there's a lot revealed in the show, so par for the course. But I've been having this conversation with my therapist recently about this pattern I've noticed where I'll have a drink or two and I'll get that that layer of buzz, that warm layer. You start to get a little bit looser, and apparently I have been told that if anybody's around me and, there's been drinks where I'm very sweet. I just become very sweet, which I like hearing. That's good to hear. But the pattern that I noticed is I will feel that layer of being buzzed. And then that's when my text messages will start to friends that are affectionate texts. So they aren't physical hugs, but it would be the step towards a physical hug. It's sort of a digital version of a hug, or it's me saying I'm underlying, I'm thinking about you, or I really would love to see you, or I'm having an issue right now. I could really use your presence, and I could really just use your embrace. And talking to my therapist about it and talking to myself about it, it's like, oh my God, I'm using this lubricant, this not just a social lubricant, but this emotional lubricant to cross this bridge, to go over this gap of acknowledging a need. I'm seeing it so explicitly because, the first or the second drink, and it's just these messages start going out. It's like, wow, like this stuff gets really locked in. And when you talked about the catch in my throat, there's something that's happening to me outside of those sort of like buzzy moments where I think something, but don't reach out. And whether that's in person or it's the first stages of meeting up with somebody to get an emotional need filled or a physical need filled, there's something that is still blocking me from doing that. And I'm acknowledging it. That's a first step, but it's something that does bother me.
This conversation is making me think about kind of the context in which friends hang out, and a conversation that I have all the time with women in my life of, we'll get together for 2 hours and at the end we have, like journal entries full of updates about what's going on with each person, how their mom is doing, how they're feeling about their new job, what's going on in their therapy sessions. And my partner will go and spend an entire night with someone and come home and I'll say like, well, did they get the house? And he's like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, well, are they like, what's going on with their IVF journey? And he's like, no, I couldn't say. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, and it's a projection on my part that like, okay, you all are not talking about these things that are important to you. You're not having these intimate moments. He doesn't necessarily view it in that way, but I'm curious for you as someone who's thought deeply about how men spend time together and connect. Like, what do you make of that phenomenon? And for you, is the block in more intimacy because there aren't those moments in hangouts when you can insert the more personal, or is it something different?
I have two thoughts about these kinds of moments and these kinds of hangouts that happen. There is one where, and I'm guilty of this too, there's this pattern of we get together and we talk about movies. And it's like, it's almost like an opiate.
Yeah.
It's just like, this is my time. Like, oh man. And you're just geeking out. And that's what that is a part of friendship that should just be, there are things that like just shouldn't be examined, which like, I just unfiltered wise, like, let's talk about this thing. Like, I want to spend time with you. And this is such a relief for me in terms of this is why, part of the reasons that we bond. I do think that there is power in having activities or spaces, going to a game together, getting together to talk about, Christopher Nolan movies or whatever, because I think that for a lot of men, there does need to be an initial filter to get to the deeper stuff. It is the responsibility on ourselves, but also like it really is a responsibility of us as friends, as the friend, to use those moments to basically get the information in between, to have the initial filter of like, we're going to be talking about this or, going to the game, etc. But to try to get to the life and what's really happening in between. And I put a lot of onus on the friends, on us asking the questions, us having the curiosity, and sometimes us providing something so that the other friend can feel free sharing with us. I've experienced it and I've seen it too I'll sit in a cafe or something and I'll have two men sitting next to me that I assume I'm like, they're here every week. Like these older guys, it seems like they're here a lot. And this is their routine. They come here and they talk about sports. They talk about sports for an hour or two and then go home. And observing the sports talk, but then hearing what I'm projecting as emotional needs at least being shared, if not fulfilled. So yeah, that game was blah, blah, blah. The game was awesome. Scored a lot of points. Have you heard from Jim about the remission status? And like, oh yeah, his wife called me and he's doing a little bit better, but blah, blah, back to sports. And then like sort of this seesawing. And I don't know that this is the perfect version, but I do know that I think the first step for emotional acknowledgement for a lot of men is at least having some version of a filter there. And again, that could be an activity. It can be a conversation topic. It is quite hard for us to come and say like, this is going to be an emotional sit down, unless it's something that we deem as, well, this is the time where I have space for my friend.
Just ahead, Mark reflects on addressing conflict in a friendship and what it's like to let a lifelong friendship go. Mark Pagán is the creator and host of the podcast Other Men Need Help, as well as the writer behind the newsletter Other Men. Stay with us after the break. This is Embodied. I'm Anita Rao. Today we're talking about male friendships, why it's difficult to make and maintain them, and what we can do about it. The data on these friendships is pretty bleak. Analysts say that since the 1990s, American men have been sinking into a friendship recession, where they not only have fewer friends overall, but also are experiencing less emotional connection within those relationships. We're talking about all of this with Mark Pagán, the creator and host of the podcast Other Men Need Help. In the third season of his show, he unpacks the cultural baggage around male friendship and reflects on how his own connections with other men have evolved over time. One piece of that story is noting the friendships he's lost, something he thought about this past January when he bought himself a somewhat unusual birthday present: a background check of a former friend.
Tim and I met in kindergarten and just hit it off. Not much more than that. And then we stayed friends. And he left the area. Maybe we were fourth grade and moved to North Carolina. I was in Maryland. And so we maintained a long distance friendship. I guess we called each other. I don't really remember. Maybe wrote letters, but we definitely would, he'd come up to Maryland. I'd go down to North Carolina. And then we still had things in common moving into adolescence. Like, we were really into hip hop at the same time. We were into like gangster movies and stuff, like tough guy, like, not that we were tough guys, but like tough guy media. But as happens, we just became a little different in terms of our lives and our tastes and things like that. I went to college. He didn't. I pursued, an urban life and like a creative life and things like that. And he didn't. He stayed sort of, and I want to use this word in a really nice way, but more provincial, sort of like stayed within a circumference, which is, I'm not judging that, or at least I'm not right now, but I'll get to that in a second. Moving into our 20s, there was just shady stuff happening. He'd call me and say, "Hey, can I borrow $20?" I say, that's weird. $20 is like such a specific amount. Or he would lie to me about who he was dating. I started to get these calls from people that were looking for him. And then there was the final straw for me. I started to slowly be unresponsive to text messages from him and emails. But the final straw was a card of mine was hacked, a PayPal was hacked. And when you look at those statements, there's so many numbers and letters sometimes. It's like, this is from United Airlines, TK, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, there were a few letters that were his last name. And I thought, and it could have been just coincidence, but I thought, you know what? This is all pointing to maybe I shouldn't be around this guy. I officially ghosted him. I never responded to a final email. And then he wrote an email back saying, I've been carrying this friendship, et cetera, goodbye, and like really angry. And it was like 2009, 2010. This is 15 years ago.
Yeah.
This is a long time ago. And I still think about him all the time. And I purchased this background check as a birthday gift. Yes, as a birthday gift to myself for perhaps some closure or some understanding, because I realized what the conflicts that I've been having were, number one, I still have questions for myself and for all of us of when is a legacy friendship one worth keeping.
And legacy friendship is like a lifelong friendship, someone that's seen you through phases of life.
Especially when, for instance, my father died when I was 14. I can look around my peer group, 95% of them never even met the man. And the memory keepers of his life and the way I was back then are far and few between, except people like Tim. So when is it, even if you aren't seeing eye to eye, even if your lives are different, when is it important to still maintain these ties? This is a rhetorical question. I don't know. I don't have the answer. The other thing that I wanted to, the sort of darker truth, and one of the questions I have of like the layers of complexity that happens in life now with friends, with moving, was this based on class at all? Was I trying to, I had a birthday a few years ago when I thought of Tim. I was looking around the room at my birthday. I was like, here is a room full of people who, when I was younger, I said, I want like New York creative class. Look at this room of people. And, I thought about myself younger, like, this is the kind of place I'd walk into this room and go like, these people are my friends. I'm like, I know cool, creative people. And I felt a sense of sadness for the sort of the friend casualties along the way that, if I'm honest with myself, part of that was class striving. And that then I did have some judgment at different points in my life of what these friends were not doing. So there was guilt there. And then, of course, the third thing was like, was I right? Was this guy into shady stuff? And to a degree he was. At least the background check answered some of those questions. But that was 2 or 3 months ago at this point, and I've had at least one dream about him. Like I still have the question, did I do the right thing here? Did I suffer a loss? Because I know how to grieve a family member. I know how to grieve a romantic relationship, but I would challenge people listening. I don't think most of us know how to grieve a friendship, and
right,
even what that means.
Right. I mean, it's making me think about, when do you let it go quietly and when do you address it more directly?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you think you would find more closure if you responded to Tim, or does this feel like the kind of final chapter in y'all's friendship story that you can begin to let go because you have found closure in another way, or have you, I guess?
I don't know. The closest analogy I've had is I think of exes and those times in life where years later you go, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. I wonder what she's doing now. I should reach out. And I'm not telling anybody, like 9 times out of 10, do not reach out to that ex. But usually what happens, or at least in my experience when that's happened in my life, is you come back to what the truth was, where you just weren't fit to be together, or like, oh no, we were growing apart. Like 5 years later, meeting up again, and I go, oh yeah, we made the right choice because you're a different person, I'm a different person. So there's that rationalizing I have in my head, but I think there's a part of me, especially with such an old friendship, I mourn the children we were, and I mourn the friendship that these boys lost. And because that still into adulthood, those childhood secrets, those childhood jokes, regardless if we were dealing with mortgages, taxes, breakups, all of this stuff, those things were still our shared language, these child versions of ourselves. So there's a question of, there's a few questions I have, but one that I sit with is, am I mourning a friendship versus am I mourning what these children lost as well as the children we were, if that makes sense.
It does. There's so much that you are exploring in your work and in your show through interviews with other men and looking intimately at their friendships. We've talked about a lot of your own friendships. I'm curious about the things that you are working on in your own friendships now in light of some of this investigation and interrogation of male friendship.
Conflict aversion is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
My own conflict aversion.
Like a willingness to put in the work to address conflict in a friendship?
Yeah. I think we all have friends who maybe take up a little bit more space, or we allow them to take up a little bit more space. Like, you didn't really ask me any questions about my life and I have stuff going on. And I am guilty of walking away, or at least not staying with some of those friendships when a conversation might have just done the trick. And I'm encountering that with some friends now, and I'm like, all right, this is a next stage of growth for me to actually, and it goes back to sort of like an overall theme that we're coming back to, this idea of addressing needs.
Yeah.
And this isn't necessarily a physical need, but this is hey, I feel like I'm supporting you a lot when we talk, and I'm 99% sure that approaching that with the men in my life or the people in my life, they'll be responsive, and they'll hear me out and make changes. So that's one of the big things.
Does that mean you haven't had any of those conversations yet, but you want to?
I literally talked to my therapist about it recently.
Yeah.
I said, this is, I can't believe I'm spending an hour talking about this, but this friend of mine was always calling me for recommendations or advice or whatever it is, and he never seems to check in with me. And so we dissected this with this plan in mind to address it with him. I'm learning to also be fair with myself, as well as I would love other men to be fair with themselves. There are certain tools we were not taught. And it's up to us, accountability-wise, it's up to us to develop those tools. We are fine with conflict in other areas, but when it comes to a longing or a need, sometimes we're at a loss. And it is okay to take a first step and go, there's like not inherent skills, or I was socialized in a way that didn't make this as easy in adulthood. So let's say that, and let's figure out what can be done. And I think those are two of the big things. And then just, as I mentioned with this example of feeling slightly inebriated to ask, to basically reach out, like that is a shameful thing that I don't like admitting, but I'm happy that I could observe it and talk with a professional about to go, all right, there seems to be a need that needs to be addressed here. So how can we do that? So working on things like that and realizing that the people in my life are there and will receive my full self and would like to participate. And I would venture to say that's the case for most people's lives. It's really hard to cross that bridge.
In the spirit of meditating on and lifting up some of the beauty in male friendships that we were talking about earlier with the handshake, is there a ritual that you have with a close male friend or something of that nature in a close male friendship that you would be willing to share with us?
I have this goal that I have no idea if this will ever happen, for a number of reasons. Part of which is just like consent. You would need the consent of people. But I would love to create sort of a museum of text threads between friends.
Okay.
Because I think there's so much there. And I think about I don't think it matters if I use his real name. One of my best friends, Eric, if somebody were to source our text exchanges, I mean, like if the government, it's like, oh my God, poor person that has to look at that. There's just not much there except all of these. This isn't a physical interaction, although we give great hugs and things like that. But I love making him laugh, or sort of hearing him laugh in my head, even when he's not around. And so we send each other. We have a few things that are patterns, but we send each other celebrity lookalike photos or memes. So, and it's sort of the thing where it, like the cliche of like waiting by the phone. Like I send it, I go, oh God, what am I, I can't wait to see what comes back. And then, he'll give an LOL or he'll just say, that's amazing. And I know, like I can just see him on the other side, just cackling. And then he'll do the same for me and things like that. So there's this shared emotional space that is the most mundane, ridiculous side of my communication. But again, I think those things are really, really important and we shouldn't discount them. And I think it's great, these details that we have with these people in our lives that, it doesn't just express interest in things. And I hate to get too lofty here, but we are meditating on this, but does express like a deep understanding of each other and love and wanting to bring the other person joy.
What a wonderful way to close this conversation. Mark Pagán, thank you so much for talking with me today. I loved speaking with you.
Likewise, thank you for having me.
As Mark shared, deepening an existing friendship takes a lot of vulnerability. But after Mark and I hung up, I realized there was one more thing I wanted to ask him about, something a little more practical. What advice he has for men who are still searching for these close friendships, and any tools he's used to make new friendships as an adult. He sent me this voice note.
Number one, it's not weird to want friends. Wanting close friends as an adult isn't strange, it is essential. We are wired for connection. That doesn't stop after college or our 20s. So remind yourself, it's normal, it's healthy, it is brave and deep to want friendships. Number two, go where you feel seen. Your people are out there, you just may need to expand your search. If your job, town, or current circle doesn't reflect who you are, expand the search. Maybe it's a queer hiking group, or gaming group, or volunteer crew, or a traveling circus. Where do you feel the most like yourself? Start there, and then take small steps to show up. Number three, friendship needs flesh and blood, and this is kind of an addendum to number two. Online friendships are real, but they get stronger when you show up for the person or the community. Friendship doesn't require sacrifice, it asks for investment. So go to things, host something, take initiative, turn a group chat into a dinner, visit a long-distance friend, or help them visit you. Presence deepens connection. I hope all that stuff helps. Have fun, be yourself, and good luck.
Mark Pagán hosts the podcast Other Men Need Help and writes the Substack newsletter Other Men. You can find out more about Mark and our show at our website, embodiedwunc.org. You can find all episodes of Embodied the Radio Show there and subscribe to our weekly podcast. You can also see behind the scenes of our show and get bonus content by following us on Instagram. Our handle is @embodiedwunc. Today's episode was produced by Audrey Smith and edited by Amanda Magnus and Wilson Sayre. Kaya Finlay also produces for our show. Nina Scott is our intern, and Jenny Lawson is our technical director. Quilla wrote our theme music. This program is recorded at the American Tobacco Historic District. North Carolina Public Radio is a broadcast service of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm Anita Rao.